Let's conclude this series of questions and answers, Jean, by returning to one of the points you made when you referred to the Vishwa Guru. India holds the G20 presidency, and that is in this context that this discourse will gain momentum, and India will try hard to use that platform to put forward the India stack, which comprises, of course, Aadhar and its electronic payment architecture, arguing that it could be used by other developing countries. And in fact, you yourself are always very much concerned to see what can be used elsewhere. And you mentioned NREGA as one of the models that could be replicated. Well, how far is this India stack facilitating direct transfers? How far does it help to do financial inclusion? And if you agree, I would like you to also tell us what kind of impact has the Jan Dhan Yojana done in the same perspective. How far is financial inclusion really promoted on the ground by these initiatives?
Okay, a lot to say on this, but briefly, first of all, the big breakthrough of financial inclusion came not with Jan Dhan Yojana, it came with the Employment Guarantee Act. Just before Jan Dhan Yojana, hundreds of millions of people, for the first time, were able to open a bank account. They had to open a bank account to receive their wages under the Employment Guarantee Act. And that's where we see a huge jump. Then Jan Dhan Yojana came, and there was another leap. Hundreds of millions of accounts opened in a short time under tremendous pressure from the central government, banks told to meet targets and so on. And many people getting another account that they didn't necessarily need just because the targets had to be met. And then, of course, Aadhar numbers being seeded at great speed in a very careless way to all these accounts without biometric verification. So you just enter the numbers as in a hurry because you have to meet your targets. I think that actually created a mess later on for years, and possibly in the middle of it, we don't really know. Because later on, it turned out that the seeding of Aadhar numbers was very faulty. I mean, it's very easy, for example, to make a data entry error and link somebody's bank account to a wrong number, and then you get all kinds of glitches in the transfer system. And then what happened is that people were told that you had to go back to the bank and with all your original documents and authenticate your Aadhar number biometrically to confirm that this is actually your number. This is what is called EKYC. In Jharkhand, they call it KYC. That created enormous hardships for large numbers of people because firstly, they didn't really know what they had to do. The way it was enforced was to freeze the accounts if people didn't submit to EKYC. And many people didn't know what they had to do and how to do it. And when they tried to do it, often they were not able to because the biometric authentication didn't work. I mean, the biometric authentication is not at all fully reliable. I have seen these problems very close quarter in Jharkhand and especially in Natehar district. I'm saying that because a claim was made at that time that these Jan Dhan Yojana accounts had been opened within minutes biometrically. This is not true. They were opened within minutes, but basically by stuffing these unverified Aadhar numbers in the accounts, and then later people were made to go through this EKYC hassle. Now, none of this affected the so-called middle class or the privileged class because, they know how to seed their information correctly. And they have facilities to correct these things online. They just have to ask for an OTP because their mobile number is in the system and so on. So it's a system that's very much geared to these privileged classes, and that actually causes a lot of problem for poor people. Now, so that's Jan Dhan Yojana. Aadhar itself, first of all, I would say that Aadhar over time has evolved, and fortunately, mainly in the direction of better safeguards, largely because of Supreme Court orders. So, for example, private entity now cannot make Aadhar compulsory for almost anything. Of course, in practice, they often try to do it. I mean, they tell people that you have to give your Aadhar, but at least legally, they cannot insist on Aadhar. They cannot even photocopy your Aadhar card. Again, in practice, they do it, but legally, at least you can defend yourself if you know that you have that right. And even the government cannot make Aadhar compulsory except for specific purposes like the DBT schemes, the cash transfer schemes. This is quite different from the initial scheme of things, where Aadhar was supposed to become ubiquitous and universal, to quote Nandan Nilekani. So if these promoters had their way, then today, everywhere we go, we would be authenticating ourselves biometrically for almost anything. I think that would have been a bit of a nightmare, but that is not happening. So I think better safeguards are in place. Nevertheless, I think the system is still quite objectionable. First of all, because of the existence of this centralized biometric database, and especially in the hands of an authoritarian government, I think this is quite dangerous. We have seen how it can be misused in a country like China, and this could happen anytime in India. So as a matter of principle, I would be opposed to that. I would not necessarily oppose to the biometrics being on the card, and we could have an identity card with the person's biometrics on the card, so that if you have doubts whether the card belongs to that person, you can ask the person to authenticate themselves biometrically without having a centralized database. So that's one objectionable thing. And the other objectionable thing, I think, is that there are still a lot of hassles for poor people. I've illustrated them with reference to Jan Dhan Yojana, but there are all kinds of hassles of other kinds. For example, when people have to update their other information, like married women, when they change residence, they have to change their details, their address details on the Aadhar database. It's not always easy. We have had cases of people who had lost their Aadhar number because the only record they had of it was their Aadhar card, and they lost the card, and now they can't retrieve the number. So they find themselves, because many people think that you can retrieve the number by biometric authentication, but that's not true. I won't go into the details, but anyway, it can be very difficult to retrieve a lost Aadhar number. So I think there's still too many hassles, reflecting the fact that it is a system designed for the privileged classes, and that too little attention is being paid to the hassles that poor people face. So I'm still opposed to the system in its present form. I am not necessarily opposed to a number, and I'm certainly not opposed to a card. I think the card is actually the one thing that has really helped people. But the card, ironically, is the one thing that IDEI didn't want. They wanted biometric authentication without a card, and to this day, they consider the card as nothing more than a means of communicating the number to the person. It's not an identity card. If you look at the Aadhar Act, the word card is not mentioned, so this card has no legal validity. The details on it, like age, name, address, and so on, are unverified. So it's actually not supposed to be important, but in practice, it's important. It gives people a facility to identify themselves in many different contexts with the same card, and that turns out, I think, for them to be quite useful. So I'm not opposed to that, but I'm opposed to the other project in its present form, and I'm hoping that it will not be extended to other countries, at least not without modification.
Thank you, Jean. Gutek has invited me to conclude, and I will do it in a couple of minutes by telling you first that we have initiated this Forum France Inde a couple of years ago to expose people to ideas they will not meet here easily. these days. Mainstream media reflect, echo the dominant discourse, and really the same way the economic survey is now approximating kind of propaganda.
Yes, not approximating, it's propaganda.
It's a propaganda. To have access to IDs that are not part of the dominant discourse is very difficult. And that's why we are so happy to have you with us for 1 full hour, because you have just done it. You have just exposed what is propaganda. Your economics is so much based in fieldwork, I would say in daily fieldwork. Your whole life is a fieldwork. So anything you say is reflecting what's going on the ground. And thank you so much for that, because your testimonies have linked in us and have helped us to enlighten others. We will make very few editing on this recording, really, and disseminate it as much as we can, and you'll get it, of course, and you can disseminate it yourself through your own networks. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed this very much. Thank you.